It was a busy Monday morning, and the city was already alive with movement. People hurried along the sidewalks, briefcases in hand, headphones in ears and coffee cups in the other. Among them was a single father, pushing a small grocery cart up the street holding his daughter's hand. He wasn't rushing to a fancy office or an important meeting. He was on his way to the building where he worked, and in his mind, he was already thinking about the long day ahead, fixing things that broke, helping people who needed assistance, and then rushing back home to make dinner before his daughter came back from school. Life had been a mixture of challenges and small victories for him. Raising a child alone was not easy, and sometimes he felt the weight of it more heavily than he cared to admit. Bills needed to be paid, the apartment needed cleaning, homework had to be supervised, and somehow he had to keep a roof over their heads. He didn't complain often because he knew that worrying wouldn't solve anything, but there were nights when he stayed awake, thinking about how he could give his daughter a better life, how he could make her proud, and how he could make ends meet. That morning, the weather was crisp, a gentle reminder of the change of seasons. The father tucked his daughter's scarf a little tighter around her neck and smiled at her as she skipped along beside him. She was full of energy, chattering about school and her friends, oblivious to the worry lines that occasionally creased her father's forehead. He loved moments like these when life felt simple, when the city noise didn't seem so overwhelming, and when he could just be there for her. As they reached the tall office building where he worked, he waved goodbye to his daughter and reminded her to stay with the neighbor for a while until he could come back. She nodded eagerly, her small face lit up with excitement at the thought of stories she could tell him later. He entered the building, greeted the receptionist with a nod, and headed straight for the elevator bank. Meanwhile, on a higher floor of the same building, a woman in a tailored suit was already feeling the stress of the day. She was the CEO of a large company, a person who carried the weight of many people's livelihoods on her shoulders. She had a busy schedule, meetings, calls, presentations, decisions that could affect hundreds of employees. Her phone buzzed incessantly, reminding her of meetings she couldn't be late for, calls she couldn't miss, and emails she needed to answer immediately. She stepped into the elevator, tapping her foot impatiently. The elevator doors closed smoothly behind her, and the soft hum of the machinery began. But then something unusual happened. The elevator shuddered once, paused, and then came to an abrupt stop between floors. The lights flickered, and the soft hum gave way to silence. At first, she thought it was a minor glitch, something that would resolve itself in a few seconds. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that she was stuck. A rising sense of panic began to take hold. She pressed the emergency button, and a calm voice came over the intercom asking if she was okay. She explained the situation quickly, trying to remain composed though the anxiety in her chest was growing. The security team assured her that help was on the way, but she couldn't help but feel trapped, claustrophobic and frustrated. Unbeknownst to her, the single father had just finished his first set of tasks for the day and was walking down the hall when he received a call from the building security. There was a problem with an elevator, they said, and they needed someone who could help get it moving again safely. He grabbed his toolkit and hurried to the elevator bank, his mind already running through the steps he would take. When he arrived, he saw the woman through the glass panel of the elevator. Her expression was tense, her hands gripping the railing as if it could keep her safe. He knocked lightly on the door and spoke through the intercom, introducing himself and assuring her that he would help. There was a brief pause, and then she looked up, relief washing over her face as she realized someone capable was already there. He went to work, checking the controls, inspecting the machinery, and talking to her in a calm, steady voice. He explained what he was doing at each step, not assuming she understood the technical details, but giving her enough information to ease her anxiety. She listened, her tense posture gradually relaxing as she realized that he knew exactly what he was doing. There was a quiet professionalism about him, but also a warmth that made the situation feel less frightening. Minutes felt like hours as he worked, but he never let his frustration show. He kept reassuring her, telling her that everything would be okay. He moved with confidence but also with care, making sure that every action he took was safe. She began to notice small details, the way he adjusted his cap, the way he wiped the sweat from his brow, the patient tone he used when explaining the steps. It was a stark contrast to the high-pressure, often impersonal world she was used to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to get the elevator moving again. The machinery hummed, the doors slid open, and she stepped out with a shaky but genuine smile. She thanked him, words spilling out faster than she could control. He smiled back, shrugging off the praise as if it were nothing. To him, it was just part of the job, helping someone in need, making sure they were safe. But for her, it was more than that. In those few minutes, she had witnessed not just his skill, but his character. As she walked away, she glanced back once, noticing the way he packed up his tools, the quiet dignity in his movements. She wanted to say more, to express how much she appreciated not just the help, but the calm reassurance, the human connection in a moment of fear. But the elevator incident had passed, and she had to return to her busy schedule. Yet a seed of admiration had been planted. The single father returned to his routine, moving from one task to the next, fixing a leaky pipe here, replacing a light bulb there, checking on reports, and making sure everything in the building was running smoothly. To him, it was just another day, another set of responsibilities to fulfill. He didn't expect recognition, accolades, or praise. He did what he did because it was the right thing to do, because helping someone in need was simply part of who he was. As he walked back to the maintenance office, he allowed himself a brief moment of pride, thinking about how the situation could have been much worse. But he didn't dwell on it. There was always more work to do, more problems to solve, more small victories that no one would notice. His life was built on these moments, quiet, unnoticed, but important. Meanwhile, the CEO continued with her day, but the memory of the man who helped her lingered. It was unusual for her to feel admiration for someone outside of her corporate world, someone who didn't carry a title, who didn't hold power or influence, yet made a profound impact through simple human decency. She found herself thinking about his words, his calm demeanor, his patience. In the rush of her life filled with numbers, meetings, and deadlines, this encounter stood out as a rare moment of humanity. By the end of the day, both of them had returned to their separate lives. He prepared dinner for his daughter, checked her homework, and read her a bedtime story. She reviewed reports, made phone calls, and sat in meetings that determined the course of her company. But in her mind, the image of the single father, calm and capable in a stressful situation, remained vivid. She didn't know his name or much about his life, but she remembered the way he treated her with respect, patience, and kindness. For him, it was just another day. For her, it was a moment that would stay with her longer than she expected. Neither of them knew that this brief encounter would have consequences beyond that day, consequences that would touch both of their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. And so, the story of an ordinary man and an extraordinary CEO began, not in a boardroom, not in a press release, but in the quiet tension of a stuck elevator, where courage, kindness, and human connection proved to be far more powerful than titles, wealth, or status. After the elevator incident, the single father returned to his work without much fanfare. To him, it was just another day. He didn't think about it much, not because it wasn't important, but because his life left little room for reflection. There were pipes to fix, doors to check, lights to replace, and countless small problems that needed immediate attention. In his world, action mattered more than recognition. He moved from one task to the next with the quiet efficiency of someone used to managing challenges alone. His daughter came home that afternoon, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she burst into the apartment. She carried with her the energy and chatter only a child can. "Daddy, Daddy, you wouldn't believe what happened at school today," she exclaimed, throwing her bag onto the couch. He smiled, listening as she recounted her day, the minor triumphs, the small dramas, the laughter, and the excitement. For him, these were the moments that truly mattered. Meanwhile, the CEO's day had followed a very different rhythm. Meetings blurred together, calls overlapped, and decisions weighed heavily on her. Yet, despite the rush, the memory of the man who had helped her lingered. She found herself thinking about his calm voice, the way he explained what he was doing, and the patience that seemed so natural. It was rare for her to encounter someone who exuded such quiet strength, someone whose presence alone could soothe fear and anxiety. Throughout the week, she returned to that thought repeatedly. In the boardrooms filled with executives who spoke in numbers, jargon, and power moves, she realized that this man had demonstrated something far rarer: human decency. He had no title, no office, no authority, yet in a few minutes he had made her feel safe and valued. It was a reminder that strength and character could come in many forms, not just from status or wealth. At work, the single father continued with his tasks. There were small challenges that required his attention. A stuck door that refused to lock properly, a broken water fountain, a faulty light in the stairwell. Each problem he approached calmly, methodically, making sure that things were fixed safely and efficiently. His colleagues had come to rely on him for this. He was dependable, capable, and quietly confident in his abilities. They often watched him work with a mix of respect and admiration, though they didn't always voice it. One afternoon, as he was adjusting a door hinge on the 10th floor, he noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. A few of the higher-level staff were looking at him differently. There were small smiles, nods of acknowledgement, and the occasional thank you that felt more personal than usual. He didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just polite recognition. But in the back of his mind, he wondered if it had anything to do with the elevator incident from the previous week. Meanwhile, the CEO had been thinking about him more than she expected. She had spent her days focused on reports, contracts, and meetings, yet the memory of his calm presence and steady hands stayed with her. She realized that she wanted to meet him again, not because of any formal reason, but because she genuinely wanted to thank him and learn more about him. It was unusual for her to feel this kind of curiosity about someone outside her professional circle. She was used to people approaching her for advice, support, or networking, but this was different. She wanted to understand the man behind the calm demeanor, the father who handled life's challenges with dignity, and the person whose kindness had left a mark on her. She called the building management office under the pretext of needing assistance with some maintenance issues. When the single father arrived, she asked to speak with him privately. He was cautious at first, unsure why the CEO wanted to meet him. He had been trained to expect that people of her status usually didn't take personal interest in someone like him. But her demeanor was different. It was warm, sincere, and genuine. She smiled, extending her hand in a gesture that made him feel at ease. "I wanted to thank you again," she said softly, not in a formal tone, but in a way that carried real appreciation for what you did in the elevator. "I know it might have been just part of your job, but it made a big difference to me." He shrugged, brushing off the compliment with humility. "It was nothing, really. Just doing my job," he replied, his voice calm, steady. He didn't boast or seek attention. Helping someone in a moment of need was simply part of who he was. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't nothing. It was a lot. To stay calm, to explain everything, to make sure I felt safe. It meant more than you realize." She paused, her eyes studying him carefully. "You have a way of making people feel seen and cared for. That's rare." He glanced away, feeling a little uncomfortable with the praise. Compliments weren't something he was used to, especially from someone of her stature. He was a man of action, not words. Yet there was something in her voice, a sincerity that made him listen. Over the next hour they talked. She asked about his life, his work, and his family. He spoke about his daughter, his challenges as a single parent, and the small victories that made life meaningful. He didn't embellish, didn't try to impress her. He simply shared his truth. And she listened, genuinely interested, asking questions that reflected her curiosity rather than her authority. They discussed how life could be overwhelming, how responsibilities could weigh heavily, and how small acts of courage and kindness often went unnoticed. He shared stories of helping residents in the building, fixing problems before they became crises, and balancing work with fatherhood. She shared a little about her life, the pressures of leadership, and the rare moments of vulnerability she allowed herself. As they spoke, a quiet connection began to form. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was something subtler, something that grew from mutual respect and understanding. She admired his humility, his patience, and the quiet strength that came from managing life's challenges with dignity. He appreciated her willingness to listen, her honesty, and the absence of pretension. By the time their conversation ended, both felt a shift. He returned to his work with a renewed sense of purpose, quietly proud that his actions had mattered beyond the immediate moment. She returned to her office carrying a lingering sense of admiration and reflection. The elevator incident, brief and seemingly ordinary, had become a meaningful encounter for both of them. In the days that followed, the CEO found herself thinking about him often. She remembered how he had handled the situation, how he had spoken with care and respect, and how his presence had made her feel safe in a moment of fear. She realized that in her world of power, decisions, and constant pressure, moments of true human connection were rare. He had given her one without even trying. The single father continued with his routine, repairing, checking, and helping as he always did. Yet there was a subtle change in him too. Something about the conversation with the CEO had reminded him that his quiet acts of courage and kindness mattered, even if the world didn't always notice. He walked through the halls with a little more confidence, smiled a little more often at those around him, and felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that integrity and compassion never went unnoticed, even if recognition came in unexpected ways. At home, he shared the story with his daughter in a way that emphasized the lesson rather than the praise. He told her that helping others, being patient, and staying calm in difficult moments was what truly mattered. His daughter listened wide-eyed and curious, absorbing the story not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in character and integrity. Meanwhile, the CEO, despite her busy schedule, began to take note of small things in her own life: the kindness of strangers, the patience of people she worked with, the moments when someone's actions made a difference without expecting anything in return. She realized that her encounter with him had reminded her of the humanity that often got lost in the corporate world, a reminder she would carry with her long after that day. And so, the two continued their lives, each affected in ways that weren't immediately visible. The elevator incident had been brief, but it had sparked something deeper, a recognition that courage, humility, and kindness were qualities that could bridge worlds, connect people, and leave lasting impressions. Neither of them realized yet how far-reaching that small act of bravery and decency would become, or how it would shape the decisions, choices, and relationships that lay ahead. Days turned into a week, and the memory of that brief encounter remained vivid. The single father continued his routine, juggling work and parenthood with quiet determination, while the CEO began to consider the impact of small gestures and how much they could mean in a world often driven by power, deadlines, and results. It was a subtle yet powerful shift, one that would set the stage for events neither could have anticipated. The story was no longer just about a stuck elevator. It had become a story about connection, respect, and the unexpected ways in which people can influence each other's lives. And although the single father didn't yet realize it, and the CEO hadn't fully acknowledged it, this moment was only the beginning of something far more significant. A journey that would test, challenge, and ultimately change them both in ways neither could have predicted. The single father woke up early the next morning, as he always did, to the soft hum of the city coming alive outside his window. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling pale gold light across the small apartment where he and his daughter lived. She was still asleep, her small frame curled under the blanket, and for a brief moment he just watched her, feeling a quiet warmth in his chest. Being a parent alone came with its own struggles and sacrifices, but mornings like this reminded him why he persisted. Every small smile, every laugh, every word from his daughter was a reward he couldn't trade for anything. After a quick breakfast and packing her lunch, he walked his daughter to the neighbor's apartment, the same routine they had followed for years. She waved goodbye cheerfully and he waved back, watching her disappear into the building. Then, with a sigh that was part exhaustion and part readiness, he stepped out into the day. At work, his tasks were routine but essential. A broken faucet, a jammed door, a light that flickered incessantly. He moved from one problem to the next with careful precision. The work itself was not glamorous, but it gave him a sense of control, a way to keep life orderly amid the chaos of his responsibilities. He knew every nook and cranny of the building, every wire and pipe, every creaking hinge, and every stubborn elevator that sometimes refused to cooperate. And yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't fully ignore the memory of the CEO's presence from the week before. Though he would never admit it out loud, there had been something about the way she had looked at him, something genuine in her eyes, that had stayed with him. He pushed it aside most of the time because in his life, there wasn't space to dwell on fleeting encounters. But sometimes, when a task was simple and repetitive, his thoughts would drift back to her, wondering if she truly appreciated the help or if it had been just another moment in her busy day. For the CEO, the elevator incident had left a more pronounced mark. Her office was a whirlwind of papers, phone calls, and meetings, yet whenever she paused for a moment, she thought of him. She recalled his calm, steady hands, the way he spoke with confidence without arrogance, The patience he showed in a situation where many would have panicked. The image of him quietly managing a moment of fear, of helping her feel safe, lingered in her mind. She realized that in a world filled with hierarchy, power, and constant deadlines, she had rarely encountered someone who could make her feel so respected and secure without even trying. She began to notice things differently. The receptionist who greeted her politely, the security guard who guided her with care, the janitor who always smiled and offered help. The memory of him had sensitized her to the humanity in others, and it was an awareness she hadn't experienced before. A few days later, she decided to act on the thoughts that had been lingering. She asked her assistant to arrange a meeting with the building management, but she didn't reveal her reason. When the single father arrived, he was initially confused. Meetings like this were not part of his usual routine, and he had no idea why the CEO would want to see him. He waited in the office, shifting from foot to foot, glancing around the sleek surroundings with curiosity. The high ceilings, polished floors, and glass walls were far removed from his everyday world, yet he remained composed. When she entered the room, she smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone soft, genuine, without any formality or pretense. He nodded, unsure of what to expect. "I wanted to speak with you again," she continued. "Not about work, not about the building. I wanted to thank you personally." He shifted uncomfortably. "It was really nothing, just doing my job." "No," she said firmly, leaning slightly forward. "It wasn't nothing. You stayed calm, you reassured me. You handled the situation with care. That matters more than you know." He hesitated, unused to this kind of acknowledgement. Praise was rare in his life, and admiration from someone like her was almost unheard of. He shrugged lightly, muttering, "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would do that," she replied gently. "Most people panic, argue, or try to rush through a situation. You didn't. You made me feel safe. That's rare." They spoke for hours that day, though the hours didn't feel long. He shared stories about his daughter, the daily struggles and joys of single parenthood, and the small acts of kindness he tried to carry out each day. She listened intently, asking questions that were thoughtful and genuine, rather than curious out of politeness. He explained how he balanced work and life, the sacrifices he made, the late nights and early mornings, the constant planning to ensure his daughter had what she needed. She found herself drawn to his honesty, the way he didn't embellish or seek approval. He spoke of life in simple terms, yet every word carried weight. She realized that the world he navigated was one she rarely considered. The world of ordinary people who faced challenges with dignity and determination, who lived quietly but meaningfully. Over the next few weeks, their encounters became more frequent. She would ask for updates about the building, not out of necessity, but as an excuse to talk with him. He remained cautious, aware that her world and his were very different, yet he found her presence comforting rather than intimidating. There was no need for titles, no need for performance, just simple, human connection. At home, he noticed changes in himself too. After their conversations, he felt a quiet reassurance, a subtle reminder that his efforts were meaningful, even if recognition didn't come often. He smiled more freely at his daughter, handled challenges at work with renewed patience, and even found small joys in moments he might have overlooked before. Life was still challenging, still filled with responsibilities, but he felt a growing sense of confidence in the choices he made daily. For the CEO, the impact was deeper than she expected. She began to reflect on the way she interacted with her own team. She realized that she often focused so much on results, efficiency, and deadlines that she neglected the human side of leadership. His calm presence and humility reminded her that influence and respect were not just about power. They were about empathy, understanding, and recognition. She started observing her team more carefully, listening more attentively, and acknowledging the small contributions that often went unnoticed. One afternoon, as the single father repaired a broken panel in the lobby, she appeared again. She didn't come with an assistant or formalities. She walked up to him carrying only a notebook and a calm, open demeanor. "Can I sit with you for a few minutes?" she asked. He nodded, adjusting his cap as he stepped aside to make room. They talked about ordinary things, the weather, the building's maintenance schedule, stories from childhood, and the little moments that made life meaningful. She shared anecdotes from her own past, times when she had struggled with decisions, felt overwhelmed, or needed guidance. He listened, offering insights drawn from his own experiences, though always with humility. Their conversations were a rare exchange of perspectives from two very different worlds, yet each found value and understanding in the other's words. Gradually, the connection deepened. She began to see him not just as a helpful employee, but as a person of integrity, strength, and kindness. He began to trust her intentions, appreciating her willingness to engage as an equal, rather than someone above him. There was a mutual respect that neither expected, born from simple honesty, patience, and the shared acknowledgement of life's challenges. The single father continued his daily routine, juggling work, parenting, and personal responsibilities. Yet he found himself looking forward to these brief moments of conversation. They were not extravagant or dramatic, but they carried significance. In her presence, he felt seen, not for his title, his income, or his achievements, but for his character, his perseverance, and his quiet determination to do right by his daughter and the people around him. For the CEO, each encounter was a reminder of the power of human connection. In her high-pressure world, she often felt detached from the people whose work and lives she influenced. Yet here was someone whose authenticity, humility, and courage made her feel grounded, reminded her of the importance of empathy, and challenged her to reflect on her own choices and values. Weeks passed, and the story of the stuck elevator became a background memory for both of them. But the influence of that moment continued to unfold. The single father approached life with renewed confidence, reassured that his efforts mattered in ways that weren't always immediately visible. The CEO began to approach leadership differently, recognizing the value of patience, humility, and human connection. They both continued to move through their respective worlds, yet an invisible thread had formed between them, a quiet understanding, mutual respect, and acknowledgement of the impact they had on each other's lives. And although neither fully realized it yet, this connection was preparing the ground for events that would change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The single father went home each night, sharing his small victories and challenges with his daughter. He told her stories not to impress but to teach her the importance of integrity, perseverance, and kindness. She absorbed these lessons eagerly, her small mind growing with understanding, curiosity, and admiration for her father's quiet strength. Meanwhile, the CEO, despite her endless schedule, found herself pausing more often, noticing the small gestures of days passed in the rhythm of ordinary life. But something had changed for both of them. The single father continued with his usual routine. Early mornings, preparing his daughter's breakfast, walking her to the neighbor's apartment, and then heading to work, where the maintenance tasks never seemed to end. Each day was predictable in its own way, filled with small challenges, doors that stuck, lights that flickered, pipes that leaked. He moved through them with quiet determination, knowing that his work mattered even if few noticed it. Yet, amidst the monotony, there was a subtle shift. He found himself thinking about the CEO more often than he expected, not in a way that distracted him from his work or obligations, but in a quiet, reflective manner. He remembered her calm voice, the way she had spoken to him without condescension, and the small yet genuine acknowledgement she had offered. In his life, where praise was rare, her words had lingered longer than he realized. They reminded him that his efforts and choices, small as they may seem, could leave a lasting impact. Meanwhile, the CEO had been considering the implications of their conversations. She had always been someone who measured success in numbers, profits, and accomplishments. Yet, after the elevator incident and their subsequent talks, she realized that some of the most meaningful lessons came from unexpected places. Here was a man who carried immense responsibility without complaint, who faced life's challenges with quiet strength, and who made a difference simply by doing what was right. She found herself thinking not just about what he had done for her, but about who he was as a person. One morning, she called her assistant with a clear purpose. "I want to meet him again," she said. "Schedule a time and make sure it's just the two of us. I need to speak with him directly." She didn't need to explain why. Her assistant knew enough to understand that this was important. When the single father arrived at her office that afternoon, he was met with her warm, welcoming smile. He felt slightly out of place among the sleek furnishings and polished surfaces, but she quickly eased any discomfort with her approachable demeanor. "I'm glad you came," she said simply. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Not about the building, not about work. About you and the way you handle life." He frowned slightly, uncertain of what to expect. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that conversation," he said modestly. "I just do my job." "That's all?" "No," she said firmly, leaning forward. "You do more than your job. You show patience, humility, and courage. You take responsibility. Not because anyone watches you, but because it's the right thing to do. That is rare." For a moment he didn't respond. He wasn't used to being seen this way, and it made him uncomfortable. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in her words. She wasn't offering praise for appearances or for wealth. She was recognizing character. Over the next hour, she shared her thoughts more openly than she had with anyone in a long time. She told him how his actions had reminded her of the importance of empathy and human connection. She admitted that she had been so focused on work, on results and efficiency, that she often forgot the value of patience and integrity. "Meeting you," she said quietly, "made me realize that leadership is more than numbers and decisions. It's about understanding people, respecting them, and recognizing the quiet strength in those around you." He listened, absorbing her words without ego or expectation. To him, life was simple: care for his daughter, do his work well, and treat people with respect. Yet her acknowledgement gave him a sense of validation, a reminder that even small acts of decency could resonate far beyond their immediate context. Then she asked him a question that caught him slightly off guard. "Have you ever thought about your own potential? About what you could achieve if you had support or guidance?" He hesitated. I try not to think about it too much," he admitted. "Life keeps me busy. My daughter and work take most of my time. I do what I can, and that's enough." "That's admirable," she said softly. "But you have more to offer. More strength, more talent, more capacity to influence not just your immediate world, but people's lives in ways you haven't imagined." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I want to help you. Not just thank you, but give you an opportunity that could make a difference for you and your daughter." He blinked, surprised. Offers of help weren't common in his life, especially from someone of her status. He felt a mixture of gratitude, skepticism, and humility. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to say anything now," she replied gently. "I just want you to think about it. Consider it. I know what it's like to face challenges alone, and I also know the difference that support and guidance can make. I see your potential, and I want to help you realize it." The conversation left him reflective. He returned to his work, repairing a broken panel in the lobby, adjusting light fixtures and checking the elevator systems. But her words lingered in his mind. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life that could be a little easier, a little fuller and a little brighter, not just for him, but for his daughter. Over the next few days, she continued to reach out. Small gestures at first, a visit to check on a repair, a thoughtful question about his family, a compliment on the way he handled a tricky situation. Each interaction was subtle yet impactful. She didn't overwhelm him with offers or promises. She allowed trust to develop gradually, giving him space to accept her gestures without pressure. He began to notice changes in his own perspective. The encouragement she offered, the sincere recognition made him more aware of his own abilities. He started approaching challenges at work with renewed confidence, trusting his judgment more fully. Small victories, fixing a stubborn elevator, helping a resident, completing a task efficiently, felt more significant. Not because of external praise, but because he recognized his own worth. At home, his daughter noticed a difference too. He smiled more, laughed more, and seemed lighter, even when the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He shared small stories of his day with her, not to boast, but to illustrate lessons of resilience, problem-solving, and kindness. She absorbed these lessons eagerly, inspired by her father's quiet determination and now by the sense that their lives could grow in ways beyond mere survival. Meanwhile, the CEO continued her work, but with a new perspective. She began to actively consider the potential in people she had previously overlooked. She encouraged team members, offered mentorship, and looked for ways to make a positive impact beyond her usual responsibilities. Her encounters with the single father had reminded her that leadership was not only about directing others, but also about empowering them, recognizing potential and fostering growth. One afternoon, she invited him to her office again, this time with a more concrete proposition. She wanted to offer him mentorship and opportunities that could help him expand his skills, increase his influence, and secure a better future for his daughter. She explained that this wasn't about charity, but about recognizing talent and integrity, qualities she deeply admired in him. He listened carefully, humility and gratitude mingling in his chest. He was wary at first. Offers like this were rare in his life and the fear of disappointment lingered. But he also felt a quiet excitement. Here was a chance not just to improve his circumstances, but to grow as a person, to embrace possibilities he had long set aside in favor of survival and practicality. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he admitted quietly. I've always handled things on my own. That's exactly why I want to help, she said, her voice steady and sincere. You've proven that you have the courage, integrity, and patience to face challenges alone. Imagine what you could achieve with support. Not just for yourself, but for your daughter and everyone around you. Her words resonated deeply. He began to consider possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine, learning new skills, taking on responsibilities that could lead to advancement, creating a more secure life for his daughter. The idea wasn't overwhelming, it was empowering. Over the next few weeks, she guided him carefully. She introduced him to opportunities, provided advice, and offered mentorship without imposing expectations. She respected his pace, understanding that growth was a process, not a sudden transformation. For the single father, this was a revelation. He had never experienced guidance in this way. Support that was steady, respectful, and rooted in belief rather than obligation. Their relationship, built on mutual respect and human connection, grew stronger. He no longer saw her solely as a CEO or authority figure. She became someone who genuinely cared about his growth and well-being. And she, in turn, recognized the profound impact of his character, the courage, humility, and quiet strength that had first drawn her attention in the elevator. At home, he shared his thoughts cautiously with his daughter, not revealing every detail of the mentorship, but allowing her to see that life could hold more than daily survival. She noticed his renewed energy, his careful planning, and the subtle confidence that now accompanied his actions. For both of them, hope had entered in small, steady increments. The elevator incident, once a brief and stressful moment, had now set into motion a series of events that were reshaping both their lives. The CEO's recognition, support, and mentorship were beginning to open doors that he had never dared to knock on. And life continued in its steady rhythm for the single father, but there was a quiet excitement in the air that hadn't been there before. The small apartment where he and his daughter lived was still filled with the routines of early mornings, school lunches, and evening homework. But now there was a subtle lightness in his steps, a confidence that had been missing for years. It was a quiet awareness that things could be different, that life could offer more than just the daily grind, and that he didn't have to navigate the world alone anymore. He continued his work at the building with his usual dedication. Each repair, each adjustment, each small problem he solved was done with care and attention. But now there was a sense of purpose beyond just getting the task done. He knew that someone had recognized not just what he could do, but who he was. That recognition had planted a seed of possibility, and he carried it quietly with him, allowing it to grow in the background of his daily life. His daughter noticed the change too. She saw her father smile more often, heard his laughter more freely, and sensed the calm confidence in his voice when he spoke. She asked him one evening as they sat together after dinner, "Daddy, are you happy?" He paused, thinking carefully about the question because happiness was not something he allowed himself to think about often. "I am," he said finally with a quiet but certain tone. "I am happy because I'm doing my best and because I know we're going to be okay. And sometimes happiness comes from knowing you're trying, even when things are hard." She nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lesson in her own childlike way, not fully understanding all the nuances, but feeling the truth in his words. Meanwhile, the CEO had been watching the situation unfold with careful attention. She had not rushed the process, knowing that change, especially meaningful change, required patience. She had offered guidance, opportunities, and mentorship without expectation, allowing the single father to make decisions at his own pace. Her observations were simple yet profound. She could see the transformation in him not just in his work, but in his demeanor, in the way he carried himself, and in the quiet confidence that radiated from his interactions with others. One afternoon, she requested another meeting. This time, it was not casual or indirect. This time, it was intentional. The single father arrived at her office, adjusting his work cap as he stepped into the polished lobby, feeling the usual mixture of curiosity and modest unease. She greeted him warmly, her smile calm and welcoming, and gestured for him to sit. "I'm glad you came," she began. "I've been observing the progress you've made, and I want to speak with you about it. Not as a CEO to an employee, but as someone who has watched you grow, persevere, and demonstrate qualities that are rare in the world today." He listened quietly, unsure where this conversation would go. She continued, her voice steady but carrying a note of warmth and sincerity that caught him off guard. "You have shown courage in ways most people would never see. You have managed challenges, cared for your daughter, and maintained your integrity through circumstances that would test anyone's patience. I wanted you to know that these qualities, your determination, your humility, and your quiet strength, have not gone unnoticed." He felt a lump in his throat, not because of pride, but because her words resonated so deeply. He was not used to being recognized in this way, not for achievements that could be measured, but for the core of who he was. In his world, actions spoke for themselves and praise was rare. Yet here was someone, a person he had met under extraordinary circumstances, acknowledging the man behind the daily responsibilities. "I want to help you take the next step," she continued. "Not because you need charity, but because you deserve opportunities to match your character and your abilities. You've proven that you can handle life's challenges with grace, and I want to offer you guidance, resources, and support so that your potential can be realized fully, for you, for your daughter, and for the people whose lives you touch." His mind raced. He had never imagined a possibility like this. Offers of help were rare in his life, especially from someone with her influence and experience. Yet she was not asking for anything in return. No favors, no obligations, no strings attached. She was simply extending recognition and opportunity, allowing him to choose the path forward. I don't know what to say," he finally whispered, his voice low and steady. Though his heart was pounding, he felt speechless in a way he rarely had in life. Her words were not just praise, they were validation, encouragement, and belief in a way that touched him deeply. "Then don't say anything yet," she replied softly. "Just listen, and know that your actions, your choices, and your character have made a difference. That alone is enough, and if you choose, I will be here to support you as you step forward into opportunities you may not have imagined before." For a long moment, he simply nodded, absorbing the magnitude of her words. He thought about his daughter, about the life he wanted to provide for her, and about the challenges he had faced alone. He realized that her recognition was not about him personally. It was about affirming the value of integrity, courage, and kindness in a world that often overlooked them. Over the next several weeks, she worked quietly alongside him, offering mentorship and guidance without pressure. She introduced him to resources, connections, and experiences that allowed him to develop new skills, explore new opportunities, and consider possibilities beyond his immediate daily responsibilities. She encouraged him to take small steps at first, gradually building confidence, and always emphasizing that progress mattered more than perfection. Through this process, the single father began to see the world differently. He approached challenges with renewed determination, balancing work, parenting, and personal growth with a sense of possibility he had rarely experienced. Small victories became milestones, each one reinforcing the belief that his efforts and choices could truly matter. He shared these experiences cautiously with his daughter, not to impress but to teach her about resilience, perseverance, and the quiet power of integrity. She watched him with admiration, seeing her father not just as a caregiver, but as a person capable of growth, courage, and influence. The CEO, meanwhile, continued to observe and support him, not out of obligation, but out of genuine recognition of his potential. She saw how his confidence grew, how his interactions became more assured, and how his quiet leadership emerged in small, meaningful ways. She understood that her role was not to overshadow him, but to empower him, to validate his abilities, and to offer opportunities that could shape his life for the better. One afternoon, after weeks of guidance and mentorship, she asked him to meet her in her office once more. He arrived feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She smiled, gesturing for him to sit. "I wanted to speak with you today," she began, her voice calm but carrying a note of warmth and admiration. Not about work, not about opportunities, but about you. About the person you've been from the very first moment we met in that elevator, and about the person you've continued to be throughout this process. He listened quietly, his heart pounding with anticipation, unsure where this conversation would lead. You've shown me something rare, she continued. A kind of strength that doesn't need recognition, a humility that doesn't demand attention, and a courage that persists even when the world is difficult. Watching you navigate your life, care for your daughter, and handle responsibilities that many would find overwhelming has left me speechless in the best way. You are the kind of person who changes lives simply by existing in them with integrity and heart. He felt the words settle over him like a wave. He had never been spoken to in this way. Never had someone recognized the depth of his character, the weight of his efforts, and the value of his choices. For a long moment he could not find words. All he could do was listen, absorb, and reflect on the enormity of what she was saying. I want you to know, she continued, that your life, your actions, and your choices matter, not because of wealth, status, or recognition, but because of the impact you have on the people around you. And I want to help you continue to grow, not just for yourself, but for your daughter, and for everyone who will benefit from your courage, patience, and kindness. He swallowed hard, finally finding a voice, though it was quiet and trembling. I don't know how to thank you. I've never been told anything like this before. You don't need to thank me, she said gently. Just continue being who you are. That alone is enough. And know that your life, your choices, and your integrity have already made a difference. That is the recognition you deserve, and the acknowledgement that will carry you forward. For the single father, those words were transformative. They validated years of quiet struggle, sacrifice, and determination. They affirmed that the life he had built for his daughter, the integrity he maintained in the face of challenges, and the courage he displayed every day were meaningful and significant. He felt a surge of gratitude not just for her recognition, but for the understanding that his efforts truly mattered. As he left her office that day, he felt a profound sense of clarity and purpose. The world had not changed overnight, and responsibilities remained, but he now carried within him a sense of empowerment, validation, and hope. He returned home to his daughter with a quiet,